Hey, welcome to another Biblical History on the Go. Today we're going to be talking about women in the Bible. So I saw there's going to be some kind of special on TV, I believe from the group that brought us the Bible DVD, the most recent one, Blu-ray series, where they kind of took some stories of the Bible and made them more graphically relevant in terms of like special effects. But they're doing a special on women in the Bible, and honestly, I don't think it's going to really encompass everything that it should, all the stories that it should. I feel like oftentimes they just go through. People who make these series, they go to the typically known people, as opposed to trying to give a voice to everyone who makes a difference, because they sign on for seasons and specific episodes. It's the politics around TV and movie making today, I believe, limits everything, and it's kind of the same in the church, which is why we always get the same 12 sermons, because you've got 12 months in a year, and Easter takes up an entire month because you got to do everything going up to Easter. So one sermon on Palm Sunday, one sermon on the resurrection, one, etc., etc. Same thing with Christmas. The entire month dedicated to talking about the things that everyone already knows every year, and then the rest of the months are filled with 1 month for each of the Gospels, and then they've run out of things to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about Revelation. Nobody wants to talk about any of the minor prophets because they're all talking about Revelation. So we go to Isaiah and say, look at this. We've never seen this before. And then they go to Daniel and they say, look, he was in the lion's den. But they don't want to talk about, the other, 15 chapters where he's all talking about Revelation. Or let's go to Psalms, but let's skip every Psalm that has anything to do with Revelation, which most of them do. And it's very cookie cutter, and I think that does a disservice to the church and to anyone who's seeking information. Granted, they do disservice to themselves by not reading the Bible. If you want to know, you'll seek. If that's what Jesus said, seek and you shall find. The adverse is true. If you do not seek, you will not find. So I don't look for people to preach to, because I don't care. If you don't care, I don't care. I will speak to those who want to hear it. And it's the same thing with this video. Obviously, if I'm speaking to you, then you're watching the video. You've sought for information. So that's just how that works. But we're going to talk about women in the Bible. And we're going to run through it. And I won't catch all the women, but I will catch some very specific and interesting people who will probably not be mentioned in the Bible series. And honestly, or obviously, I expect you to go through the Bible as well. It's super easy. Download an app on your phone. It's called YouVersion. It's a Bible app, and it's got the Bible in hundreds of languages. So you really don't have an excuse if you have a hard time reading it. They've got audio Bibles. You press the volume button and it'll give you a little thing with a bar for each chapter. You just press play and it'll continue reading it, so you can literally go through the entire Bible. And it's got speed, so if you don't want them to talk too slowly, you can increase the speed. Really, you could get through the entire Bible if you were just listening to it in 2-3 days. The entire Bible, like from Genesis to Revelation. Granted, it's a lot of information, so you might need to skip back every now and again and say, okay, what was that? How did, I'm not quite sure about that. Sure, but still, in a week, you could go through the entire Bible. And granted, that's continuous, so you obviously would split it up, but it's very easy to be done. So I encourage you to go through these stories. I'll tell you where the stories are, where these people are located. We're going to start from Genesis. The first woman, Eve. Now, people typically will gloss over this. However, Eve is significant in that she was created out of man, because God created Adam, he created animals, and he specifically created Adam with this woman-sized hole right? So, and I mean spiritually. God created Adam with a need, a desire for a companion that was like himself. And that's super important because God is perfect and he created everything and he said it was good. When he created man, he said it was very good. Man, however, being very good in the eyes of God in creation, was created with a deficiency, created with a need for woman. That is super important because it was not an accident. It was by design. God knew Adam would want to be with someone because he created someone. He created that hole in his heart to want to be with someone who was not God. And that's we have to catch that. God created a place in man and woman's heart for him, a place that he only can take. But women and men were created to need each other in a way that God does not provide. And that might sound like blasphemous or heretical or whatever, but let's not be stupid. God created everyone, and this is specifically how he did it. He created man and woman to need each other, and not to need each other more than God, but to need each other in a way that God will not provide, that he refused to provide. So you hear people saying like, oh, I'm married to Jesus. No, you're not. You're just being facetious. But the reality is God created man and woman to need each other for companionship. Why? That is what Paul calls the great mystery. Although it's not really a mystery. If you've seen my video on marriage, go check it out. All the information's there. I even give the verses and everything, all the specifics for you to understand how marriage works. Marriage is not a priest. It's not a ring. It's not a set of words. It's not a paper that you get from your state office, who has no power vested in them by God, as no one does. Because God's not on the internet dishing out marriage licenses and certifications to be officiants. That's got nothing to do with God. Marriage is about sex. Sex is marriage. It is not an act when you're in marriage. It is the act that consecrates marriage. It is the actual marriage. It's a union. Union is not it's not a subjective term. That if you choose to be with someone, then you're united with them. That's not how that works. That's not how marriage works. So God created man and woman to need each other, and in that union, which is obviously man and woman in intercourse, that act is what creates the union, and that act is what unites the spirit. It's what binds the souls, as the Bible says, they will cleave to one another, and the two will become one flesh. That is the mystery, the idea that the understanding that through intercourse man and woman become one. Spiritually they are bound, and that's what God intends to do at the end of time. If you read through the entire Bible, or even just read Genesis and see what happens there, and before it gets the fall, skip that, go straight to Revelation, read the last 2 chapters, I think, where it talks about like New Jerusalem and everything, and you'll see that God, when he returns after Judgment Day, he unites himself with all of mankind, everyone who is his, and he makes us all part of God. We are united in the same way that man and woman are united, in not through sex, but because we're all given different bodies, but our spirits are united forever. So we are no longer relying on God to be near us as it was in the Old Testament, or with us as it was in the New Testament with Jesus, or within us as it is now, but part of us. That's the great mystery. That's a great revelation of the mystery. So women in the Bible, Eve was that first woman who is the catalyst, essentially, to reveal to us the purpose, the significance, the immense significance of women in the Bible, of women in general. Women are made for men and with men. That's why in Genesis, God constantly is saying, it sounds like he's repeating himself, but he's specifically saying, God created man and he created woman. Man and woman created he them. He's specifically and consistently saying, I created both of you. I created you for each other. I created you with each other. I created both of you equally. Now, this is not to highlight specifically women's rights or equality. That should be a natural thing as a human being. Culture has dictated otherwise, but that's not the purpose of this here. The purpose is in creation. God did not create culture. Culture is learned. That's something you learn in anthropology. Culture, regardless of whether you took a baby from a different culture and a baby from this culture, you switch them out, they're going to learn whatever it is that the people who they consider mother and father are going to teach them. Whatever that culture says, that's what they will learn, that's what they will do. Same thing, taking a baby out of time. If you were to take a baby from 1760 and drop them into 2017, and take a baby out of 2017 and drop them into, I don't know, the 3000 BC, they will be no different because they will learn whatever it is the culture teaches them, and that will make them part of that culture. But as a human being, they are simply a human being without culture until they learn it. So Eve is the most significant woman in the Bible. People might say, oh, well, what about Mary? She gave birth to Jesus. That's what the people who were alive in Jesus' time were saying. They're like, oh, how blessed is Mary because she gave birth to God. Yes, she is blessed for that, and she is remembered for that, and that is super significant. But in terms of what it means to be a woman, Eve is she is the pinnacle of the understanding. She was created for man, to be united with man, so that through marriage, the spirit will be united. She is the revelation of the purpose of every man and woman on earth who has ever lived. The purpose is to live a life in searching God, to be reunited with God when he returns. When God comes to the earth, we are united with God. We are made part of God. What does that mean? Nobody knows, but it's similar, obviously, as marriage, where a man and a woman are in love, they're united, and they become part of one another. In that same way, we will become part of God. So, next woman. So if we continue through Genesis, you kind of keep scrubbing ahead. The next thing you see, essentially, there's Isaac and Rebecca, but there's not really anything significant there. Continue on, we get to Jacob. Jacob runs away, and what's that girl's name? Rachel and Leah. Okay, this is another significant story of women in the Bible, not because Jacob follows Rachel and he gets tricked and works for 14 years to try to get her father Laban to release her so that he can marry her. This story is significant because there are two different type of women depicted here. Rachel is the one that Jacob loved. Leah specifically says he hated. Jacob ends up having six sons, specifically sons, because it doesn't talk about the daughters, although they did have daughters, and the daughters were significant in the stories that happened. But of course, culture, the patronage of women did not exist necessarily. So Jacob has about six sons from Leah, the one he ends up marrying first. Of course, he didn't have sons with them until afterwards. But through Rachel, because Rachel was barren, he ends up only having one son. That's Joseph, and he has some other sons from their handmaids when they no longer, when Leah's no longer able to have kids, she gives him her handmaid, and he has more sons. Rachel does the same, even though she couldn't have kids in general. The last kid to be born was Joseph. And Joseph was the one that Jacob loved, and he essentially neglected his other 11 sons, and they grew to hate Joseph. And of course, they end up shipping him off to Egypt, and pretending that he had died. Different story. But what's significant here is not only the fact that, you know, Jacob was a horrible father, but the wives, Leah and Rachel, they fought essentially over whether or over who would give Jacob more sons, because in those times, in that culture, regardless of the culture, actually, in that time, as a human being, it was very much about establishing a city, because the world was barren enough that people could just travel to a new place and say, this is where I'm going to make my home, and then they just continue to procreate there. And that city was named after them, the father figure of the group, and they continued to prosper and to grow. And that's why all the cities in the Middle East, if you look at them, they are named after people. They're all named after people. Israel, obviously. Jerusalem, however, that section of the Middle East, those were places that were named by God. So if there's any meaning there, that's something else for you to study and to figure out. But look at all the places. They're all biblical names, Old Testament names. The same thing with Islam, because they share the Old Testament up until Jacob. They don't accept Jacob as being the heir to the Promised Land. Rather, they think Ishmael, the first son of Abraham by his handmaiden, not by his wife, should get the Promised Land. So that's where the Old Testament splits off for those who believe in Islam. But Rachel and Leah were two very different women. They were sisters, but Leah loved Jacob, and she did everything she could to get him to love her back, even though her father had tricked him into marrying her first, which means they consummated their marriage. They had sex, intercourse happened, and they had to wear veils at night. So he didn't know that he was being married to the first daughter, because the father came up with the scheme. So because of this, Jacob hated Leah, even though Leah did everything in her power to make him love her. She did everything in her power to be a good wife. Rachel, on the other hand, was a horrible woman. She was crude. Just go and check out the story. It's in, I think, like Genesis 32. She was crude, constantly telling Jacob if he didn't give her a son, she would kill herself. She grieved Jacob to no end. And she lied. She was an idolater. She stole her father's idols, which caused him to go after them when Jacob tried to leave, and they got caught. And they didn't get caught with the idol because Jacob didn't know she had it, but she was just not a good person. But Jacob loved her, and he hated the one that was good to him. There's a sermon in that itself. But those two women, significant because it shows kind of how we are towards God, where God is both of the wives, right? In the sense that God loves us, and he does everything he can for us, and does no wrong to us, yet sometimes we hate him because, well, no good reason. And whereas, well, I guess God wouldn't be Rachel, but Rachel would essentially be the world, God would be Leah, where we see something we like and we seek after that, even though it's not good to us, and we have someone who is good to us, yet we seek the other. So let's skip ahead, scrubbing forward. We get to Exodus after the whole Joseph incident. Miriam. No, skipping ahead. We get to Judges. So once the Israelites are landed in Israel, in some of their lands, because they didn't conquer everything, they get complacent. They start to dwell with the people there. As a result of them not clearing out the people that God told them to do, they end up being grieved by the Philistines and by all the other people that they didn't clear out, meaning kill. These people were a culture that God told them to kill. Do not let them survive, because they would try to kill you. The Israelites didn't believe him. They believed what a lot of people today do. People are mostly good. It'll be fine. We'll just dwell with them. And constantly throughout the Old Testament, throughout history, these groups still today try to eliminate the Israelite people from the face of the earth. Genocide after genocide after genocidal attempt. That's what happens. God, knowing everything, including the future, knew this would happen. So you get the judges, and out of these judges, there is a judge, a female judge. Essentially, before they had kings, God would send somebody with the sole authority to deliver the people from their oppressors. Deborah was such a judge. So Deborah is a woman, and she was a judge of Israel over the entire nation, including the men. And nobody had any problem with this. In her time, there was another woman by the name of Jael. I'm not sure how exactly to say it. That's how I say it. Whatever. That's her name. So the Israelites, under the rule of Deborah, went to war. And I believe Deborah went to war with them. And they won this battle against their oppressors. The king of the other side, of the enemy side, fled. And there was this guy who was against Israel, essentially, who was part of Israel, and he didn't want anything to do with the war. He left. He had run away, and he took his wife, and he went to the enemy kingdom. So this lady Jael, his wife, found one day at the end of the battle, the king ran away. He found himself at their tent, and she told the king, "Come on in. I'll make sure I'll hide you here. I'll protect you." She brought him in, gave him some milk to drink, made him nice and comfy, let him go to sleep. Then she took a tent spike and a hammer and nailed it through his head. Then when the Israelite people came through looking for the king who had fled, she led them into the tent, say, "This is the person you're looking for." This woman single-handedly killed the king of the enemy of the nation of Israel. She was the righteous one in the situation. She knew and she accepted that the Israelite people were her people, that what God says goes, and she was obedient to that. Also kind of a badass. So this is a really significant person, because she kind of exemplifies the hardness and the fervor of a woman, not a woman in scorn, but a woman in general. The capability, the power, the authority of a woman. It's not anything below a man. Anything that women could do, men can do as well. Of course, beyond, or not including the things that only men can do, or based on their physical attributes, because men are men, women are women. That's just sex, and sex is genetics, and that's just how it works. We're not talking mutations. Mutations are not the norm. They are mutations for a reason. But she exemplifies the authority of mankind, and mankind includes women. So another very significant story there. Going on, we're going to actually just kind of skim over the entire book of Chronicles and Kings, because this is going on to where the Israelites decided they no longer want God to be authority over them. They want a man, so they appoint Saul, and Saul becomes king. This is Saul who eventually is overthrown by David, not by David's choice, but by the people's choice. But after David, after his son Solomon, after Rehoboam, Solomon's son, the kingdom of Israel was split, because Solomon, being the richest person in the entire world who ever lived, as all scholars accept, he built idols to his wives' gods, and he had 300 concubines, who knows how many wives. For a lot of people, basically they turned his heart away from God, and so God turned the nation of Israel over to the world. He split off. The nation of Israel, the 12 tribes, became one. God managed the nation of Judah, the tribe of Judah, which is current modern day Israel. So during this time, something you see constantly throughout both of those books is that the mothers of the kings were always the primary counselor. They essentially ran everything. You even see this in the New Testament with John the Baptist when he was beheaded. He was beheaded because of the request of a woman's mother. The mothers often were in power over the men. They gave the ideas, the men did whatever the women said. Although the man was the face and he was the authority, he got his ideas from the woman, and that says something too. There's plenty more. We'll get there. I'll have to do this in another video. But if you like this video, if you like this information, like, subscribe, share, more than anything, talk about it, because women are important, and just because the church or TV tends to suppress that, that does not change the fact that God never did. So this information is available, it's out there. I encourage you to continue watching these videos to get any more information, and keep an eye out for the next one. So have a good one.